It's not Kyle or Holden. Who is the baby's father? Claire reveals the baby's true dad, on a storm-soaked autumn in Genoa City, the kind where thunder rolls low over the skyline and secrets feel to joggle in the charged air. The verity eventually exploded out of Claire in a way no bone anticipated, changing the emotional geography of the young and the restless ever, because for weeks whispers had circulated through the Newman estate, the Abbott manse, and every polished corridor of Jabot that Claire's gestation was the ticking timepiece at the center of a brewing war, and nearly everyone believed the father had to be either Kyle Abbott or Holden Novak, the two men most visibly entangled in her complicated recent history. But what no bone anticipated was that Claire had been carrying not just a child, but a precisely guarded verity that would shatter alliances, review pedigrees, and shoot shockwaves through families that have defined Genoa City for decades. The drama had escalated when Kyle, trying to do the honorable thing, intimately offered support despite his own query, standing in the Abbott living room beneath the vigilant aspect of his father, Jack Abbott, whose defensive instincts burned at the study of another reproach attaching itself to the Abbott name. While across city at the Newman estate, Victor Newman observed developments with calculating intensity, apprehensive that any connection between Claire's baby and the Abbotts, or worse, the Newmans, could alter the balance of power he so precisely curated. And though Claire had grown closer to the Newman root in recent months, indeed participating vulnerable moments with Victoria Newman, who honored in Clare a wounded adaptability that imaged her own youngish tone, she had remained maddeningly silent about the identity of the father, allowing enterprise to run rampant. Holden, protective and decreasingly agitated, swore to anyone who would hear that the timing made him the most likely seeker, yet his overcompensation only fueled dubitation. And Kyle, torn between stopgap and dread, intimately commended in Summer Newman, whose complicated history with him made her response an unpredictable blend of covetousness and reticent empathy, as she plodded with the possibility that another child connected to Kyle could ever tether him to a woman she didn't completely trust. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers saw occasion in the chaos, subtly encouraging mistrustfulness and shifting conflict, because for Phyllis, information is currency, and fermentation is influence, and she tasted that Claire's silence concealed commodity far more explosive than a simple maternity twist. The turning point came at a gathering meant to calm jitters and design concinnity, an intimate regale orchestrated by Victoria in the stopgap that bringing crucial players into one room might reduce gossip and direct attention on Claire's good, but rather the evening came a gauntlet, as pressure coddled beneath polite discussion until a single question from Jack, delivered with measured graveness, cut through the pretense. Claire, for the sake of everyone involved, especially that child, who's the father? The room was fully still as Claire started to lose her countenance. She put her hand on her stomach like she was getting strength from the baby inside her. She looked straight at everyone. Said, "It's not Kyle." You could see the color drain from his face. He felt relieved but also hurt. He'd started to suppose about being a father and proving himself. Also Claire turned to Holden. Said, "And it's not you moreover." This stopped him from saying anything. The room started to mutter. Victor's eyes got narrower like he was curious about what was going on. He allowed. This wasn't about particular drama but about commodity bigger. Claire explained that a month ago she had felt veritably alone and disconnected from herself. She had met someone from her once, someone who had always been important to her. As she spoke, Victoria's face changed from confusion to understanding. She knew what Claire was talking about. When Claire eventually said the name of the father, the room erupted. It wasn't Kyle or Holden. Someone from a veritably important family in Genoa City. This was a surprise to everyone. Victor had to suppose about what this meant for his family's business. Claire said she wasn't trying to beget trouble. She wanted to take control of her life. She didn't want people to presume about her baby's father. She told everyone about the night she got pregnant. It wasn't a planned thing. Commodity that just happened. She had been hysterical to tell anyone because she didn't want to start a fight. Now that everyone knew, effects started to be. Jack was allowing about how this would affect his family's character. Summer was trying to cover herself. Phyllis was trying to figure out how to use this information to her advantage. Holden was worried because his pride was hurt. Kyle did commodity unanticipated. He stepped forward. Supported Claire. He said he watched about her and the baby indeed, though he wasn't the father. Jack was proud of his son for being mature. Victor wasn't happy about the situation. He was allowing about how this could affect his business. If the father was who Claire said, also the baby could be a part of the family's future. That night Victoria talked to Claire in private. She asked if the father was going to come intimately. Claire said he didn't know yet. She hadn't told him because she wanted to be sure about everything. As time passed, people started to reply. Phyllis was intimating at secrets being kept. Summer was torn between commitment. Holden was retreated. Kyle started to concentrate on his work. Claire sounded more at peace. She had told the verity. Felt lighter. She was defensive of her baby. Now she was clear about what she wanted. The father's response was still to come. He'd have to deal with the fact that he was going to be a part of commodity bigger than himself. In Genoa City, being a parent isn't about particular effects but about history and symbols. This baby could bring people together. Drive them piecemeal. After Claire told the verity, she faced counter-reaction and support. She realized that telling the verity can be destabilizing. It can also remove visions. Alliances started to shift. Victoria was probative. Cautiously. Jack was championing for quality. Victor was working behind the scenes. Kyle was reconsidering his part. The question was no longer who's the father. What kind of family will this child have? And in that elaboration lay the enduring brilliance of The Young and the Restless, a saga where identity, heritage, and love collide in ways that ensure no disclosure exists in insulation, and Claire's protestation that it was neither Kyle nor Holden but someone far more entwined in the megacity's power structure guaranteed that the coming chapters would explore not just maternity, but the veritably meaning of belonging in a city where blood ties are both guard and brand. In the days that followed Claire's stunning concession, Genoa City felt as if it were balancing on a fault line, every discussion carrying the faint earthquake of what was still to come. Because while she had made it crystal clear that the baby's father was neither Kyle nor Holden, she had designedly withheld the final detail from the larger public, choosing rather to tell only a select many in that charged room at the Newman estate, and that decision alone strengthened the conspiracy swirling around The Young and the Restless, where secrets are infrequently contained for long. Victor retreated into his study that night with the weight of heritage pressing heavily on his shoulders, his mind calculating not just the emotional consequences but the strategic bones. Because if Claire's claim proved true, also the child she carried was connected by blood to the Newman dynasty in a way that could complicate race, business alignments, and particular commitment, and Victor Newman wasn't a man who left similar matters to chance, especially when the stability of his conglomerate was at stake. Yet beneath the sword surface of Victor Newman flitted commodity unanticipated, a flicker of curiosity about the possibility of another life bearing the Newman birth, another branch extending from the family tree he guarded so fiercely. Across city, Kyle Abbott set up himself pacing the living room at the Abbott manse long after everyone differently had gone to bed, replaying Claire's words in his mind. The relief that he wasn't the father tangled with a surprising sense of loss, because part of him had begun to imagine redemption through responsibility, a chance to prove to Jack Abbott that he could rise above once mistakes and come the kind of man good of the Abbott name, and now that imagined future faded, leaving him to defy the uncomfortable verity that his desire to be the father may have been lower about Claire and further about proving commodity to himself. Jack, ever perceptive, tasted the conflict brewing in his son and offered quiet counsel, reminding Kyle that fatherhood isn't defined by extremity but by commitment, and that occasionally the bold thing a man can do is support without enjoying, advice that reverberated deeply indeed as Kyle plodded to find his footing in the new dynamic forming around Claire. Meanwhile, Holden Novak, soaked by public redundancy, oscillated between outrage and instability, averring to anyone who would hear that Claire had misled him, that she owed him more translucency, but beneath his demurs lay a bruised pride rather than genuine heartache, and indeed Phyllis Summers honored the difference, though she pretended to indulge his grievances for her own strategic recreation, because chaos, when duly nurtured, can be extraordinarily useful. It was Victoria who sought Claire out the coming morning, chancing her in a quiet corner of crimson lights, hands wrapped protectively around a mug she slightly belted, and as Victoria Newman sat down across from her, the discussion shifted from enterprise to sincerity, Victoria admitting that the disclosure had shaken her not because of reproach, but because it forced her to defy how numerous lives were still being shaped by opinions made in moments of vulnerability, and Claire, eyes bright with unshed gashes, confessed that she had no way intended for her child to come a chess piece in anyone's power game, that her silence had been born not from manipulation but from fear of exactly what was unfolding now, where every rumored discussion sounded to weigh her worth against the implicit influence of the man she had named intimately. The identity of that man, deeply entwined with the Newman heritage yet frequently overshadowed by larger personalities, began to ripple outward through hushed enterprise, and though Victor maintained a public facade of countenance, he initiated discreet inquiries, vindicating timelines, attesting data, icing that no deception hovered to undermine the family from within, because if this child was indeed connected to him by blood, also Victor intended to shape the narrative rather than be blindsided by it. Summer Newman, caught between fidelity to her family and empathy for Clare, plodded with her own response, apprehensive that any new Newman heir at law could recalibrate her position within the intricate web of heritage and influence, yet she surprised herself by choosing compassion over competition, fating that Clare's vulnerability imaged her own once jests of being defined by lineage rather than individuality. As the days progressed, the true father, having eventually been informed, responded not with denial or illusion but with stupefied soul-searching, scuffling with the enormity of getting a parent under circumstances formerly drenched in public scrutiny, and his original silence only heightened expectation, because in Genoa City, a delayed response frequently precedes a seismic one. When he ultimately requested a private meeting with Clare, it wasn't at the estate or a commercial office but in the quiet domain where they had formally participated a candid discussion months before, a emblematic return to the emotional crossroads that had led them then, and there, beneath bare downtime branches, he conceded the possibility of motherhood with an admixture of fear and fierce protectiveness, admitting that while he'd no way planned for this, he couldn't ignore the pull of responsibility now coursing through him, and Clare, hearing sincerity rather than strategy in his voice, felt a fragile thread of stopgap begin to form. Still, Victor's mindfulness of that meeting assured it would not remain purely particular, and soon conversations of trusts, custodianship contingencies, and media operation entered the picture, emphasizing the reality that in families like the Newmans, indeed the most intimate developments are inescapably intertwined with power. Jack, observing from the abbot's side, advised Kyle against being drawn into a contest that no longer belonged to him, emphasizing that quality in defeat can be as important as triumph, and Kyle, taking those words to heart, surprised Clare by offering backing without anticipation, a gesture that subtly readdressed their relationship from romantic pressure to collective respect. Holden, unfit to accept impertinence, tried to stir mistrustfulness by questioning timelines intimately, but his credibility waned as inconsistencies in his own narrative surfaced, and indeed Phyllis, seeing dwindling returns, shifted her focus toward aligning herself with whichever body promised the most influence once the dust settled. Through it all, Clare's metamorphosis came decreasingly apparent, the weight of secretiveness replaced by a steadier confidence, because in speaking the verity, still disruptive, she had reclaimed authorship over her story, refusing to allow enterprise to script her child's future. And as whispers solidified into acknowledgement that the baby's father carried Newman blood, the megacity braced for the ineluctable coupling of particular and commercial consequences. Victor's ultimate station surfaced during a tense family gathering, where he declared that while he'd not tolerate manipulation, he'd also not turn his reverse on his own blood, a statement that carried both warning and hello, signaling that the child would be defended but under his vigilant authority. Victoria, balancing daughterly fidelity with motherly empathy, supported for boundaries that prioritized Clare's autonomy, creating a rare moment of alignment between strength and compassion within the Newman scale, and as medications began for a unborn no bone had anticipated, nursery plans still banded, legal fabrics drafted, emotional islands tentatively erected, the original question that had galvanized Genoa City, if it's not Kyle or Holden, also who? Evolved into a deeper reckoning about identity, heritage, and choice, themes that have long defined the young and the restless, and in the unfolding fate of Clare's disclosure, the megacity discovered that the most explosive trueness aren't simply about biology, but about the courage needed to stand in them, claim them, and reshape the future in their wake. One communication remaining. Start a free plus trial to keep the discussion going. Try plus free. The disclosure didn't settle into Genoa City still. Rather, it resounded like a shower beneath every commerce, every boardroom exchange, every family regale that pretended normality while pressure coddled just below the face. Because once it came inarguable that Clare's baby carried Newman blood, the counter-accusations stretched far beyond love and into heritage, and power, the very pillars upon which so much of life in the young and the restless has always rested. At the Newman estate, Victor's study came command central, documents still requested, timelines scanned, and confidants consulted, yet despite his instinct to control every variable, there was an turnabout of commodity more particular shifting within Victor Newman, a recognition that another child bearing the Newman name, still suddenly conceived, was not simply a strategic consideration but a living extension of his lineage, and that mindfulness softened his tone in subtle ways indeed. As he maintained a public posture of measured authority, Victoria observed her father's internal conflict with rehearsed perception, understanding that he equated protection with power, and she gently reminded him that Clare was not a commercial accession nor a rival superintendent but a youthful woman navigating fatherhood under a microscope, a point that reverberated more deeply than Victor watched to admit, because beneath the Goliath surface he remained fiercely pious to family, especially when blood was involved. Meanwhile, Clare set up herself conforming to the incongruity of visibility and insulation, her gestation now common knowledge among the inner circle yet still shielded from the broader public, and though she had anticipated counterreaction, what surprised her most was the unanticipated immutability of the baby's father, whose original shock evolved into quiet resoluteness as he began attending movables, asking practical questions, and standing beside her without fanfare, signaling that whatever misgivings lay ahead, he'd not retreat. Kyle Abbott, seeking to reclaim emotional equilibrium, threw himself into work at Jabot, determined to prove to Jack Abbott that maturity didn't depend on maternity, yet indeed as he concentrated on strategy meetings and product launches, flashes of what might have been flitted through his mind, particularly when he caught casts of Clare across city, her posture more defensive now, her aspect more predicated, and though he'd stepped back with grace, the mortal heart infrequently disengages on command. Jack, ever the statesman, reached out intimately to Victor in an symptomatic gesture of solidarity, emphasizing that whatever contest was between Abbott and Newman should engulf the coming generation before it indeed arrived, and though Victor's response was characteristically guarded, there was an implicit agreement that some battles were better laid over in the face of new life. Holden, decreasingly sidelined, tried one final scheme by insinuating intimately that Clare had manipulated timelines to align herself with the Newman heritage, but his blameworthiness fell flat when brazened with medical records and firm disconfirmations, and his credibility eroded further as abettors receded themselves, unintentional to be tethered to bitterness masquerading as righteousness, through it all. Phyllis Summers remained vigilant, calculating angles and assessing which narrative thread would yield the most influence, yet indeed she honored that this plot defied easy exploitation, because Clare's countenance and the father's arising responsibility left little room for the kind of reproach that thrives on denial. Victoria strengthened her involvement not as an superintendent but as a tutor, participating candid stories of her own complicated trip through fatherhood, explaining how public scrutiny can distort private joy if one allows it, and Clare heeded with gratefulness, fating in Victoria's vulnerability a design for balancing strength with openness. As weeks passed, subtle shifts passed across Genoa City, alliances recalibrating in response to the expanding Newman circle, commercial strategists recalculating implicit heirs at law, and indeed social assignations subtly conforming to include Clare in spaces that formerly felt distant, emphasizing how fleetly status can change when pedigrees are verified. Yet amid the majesty of heritage and influence, the most poignant moments unfolded in quieter settings, the father assembling a crib with hands more habituated to boardroom gestures than screwdriver grips, Victor standing at a distance during an ultrasound appointment, his expression undecipherable yet his presence unmistakable, Kyle offering congratulations without resentment when the baby's twinkle was participated with the family, and Victoria placing a reassuring hand on Clare's shoulder as if to anchor her against the curve of prospects. Clare herself evolved visibly, the anxiety that formerly shadowed her replaced by a calm determination to define fatherhood on her own terms, averring that while the Newman name carried weight, it would not outdo her part as primary guardian of her child's emotional geography, a station that earned respect indeed from Victor, who intimately conceded that strength of will is the most dependable heritage. Exchanges gradationally shifted from maternity to medication, from enterprise to structure, And as legal fabrics were drafted to ensure the child's security without compromising Clare's autonomy, a